Hello everybody, welcome back to Games and Toys TV, and in today's video I wanted to talk about a movie that I think is very overhated and is in fact underrated. The movie I'm talking about is the 6th installment of the Jurassic Park franchise. This movie is one of the most hated legacy sequels of recent memory, and is widely regarded as one of the worst, if not the worst, movie in the Jurassic Park franchise. And honestly, I don't really understand why. Well, I understand why a little bit, but frankly, I think this movie gets way too much hate, and I'm going to be explaining why, and I'm going to be giving you my hot take that Jurassic World Dominion is a very underrated movie. So let's get into it. So to understand this movie and really its reception, we have to go back to Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom, the 5th film in the Jurassic Park franchise. That movie ended with dinosaurs getting released onto the mainland and into the wider world, and a lot of people were really looking forward to seeing what the next movie would do with that idea. And that is one of the big reasons why so many people were disappointed with Jurassic World Dominion, because the movie doesn't really focus on the dinosaurs taking over the planet and kind of has a bunch of other plot lines that it focuses on. Yeah, we'll get to the locusts here in a second. But that seems to be one of the biggest criticisms of this movie, is that it didn't focus on the dinosaurs spreading across the world and sort of the dangerous implications of that. Instead, choosing to focus on a bizarre plotline about locusts destroying the global food supply. The plotline about the genetically modified locusts in this movie is probably the biggest thing that a lot of people point to when they say the movie is bad. Because quite simply, no one really wanted to see a movie about bugs. Everyone, of course, was looking forward to seeing dinosaurs. I mean, this, of course, is a Jurassic Park movie. And straight away, I have a few defenses of a lot of these criticisms, or at least a few counterpoints. So when people say that this movie barely has any dinosaur action at all, I mean, they're frankly just lying. I mean, like, this movie by far has the most dinosaur screen time out of any film in the franchise. The dinosaurs are on screen for about 20 minutes, or I think actually over 20 minutes. And there are lots of drawn-out action scenes dedicated to the dinosaurs. Now, I'm not saying all of the dinosaur action in this movie is perfect. No, there's lots of things you could criticize about a lot of the action scenes in this movie and how the dinosaurs are portrayed in it. But simply put, the movie is absolutely stacked with dinosaurs. Not only does it have the most dinosaur screen time out of any film in the franchise, but it also has the most dinosaur species ever seen on screen in a Jurassic film. However, this does lead to a problem that I personally have with the movie, and that is that a lot of the dinosaurs kind of feel like they have small roles. Because there are so many different species of dinosaur in this movie, a lot of them unfortunately get very little screen time. This movie definitely chose quantity over quality with the dinosaur action scenes. Even some of the big main dinosaur action scenes that they were hyping up in all the trailers only last about a few minutes in the final movie. The Pyroraptor and Therizinosaurus scenes, for example, and heck, even the Dimetrodon scene, only last for around 2 to 3 minutes. And even the Giganotosaurus, the main dinosaur antagonist that they were hyping up in all of the marketing, really only has about 6 minutes of total screen time. The Giganotosaurus is another thing a lot of people point to when criticizing this movie, but I want to talk about a few other things before I get to that particular dinosaur. So by far, the biggest thing that this movie was hyping up in all the trailers, it wasn't even really the dinosaurs. It was the fact that they were bringing back the original characters from the original Jurassic Park. You know, Dr. Grant, Ian Malcolm, and Ellie Sattler would all be returning, and we would get to see them interact with the characters from the Jurassic World trilogy. A lot of people were really excited to see that, and honestly, I think this movie delivered. All of the criticisms that say that, you know, the legacy characters weren't utilized well, I frankly just don't understand. Yes, I guess you could say it's a little disappointing that they were only utilized in the whole Locust plotline, but I mean, hey, whether you love it or hate it, that plotline takes up like 50% of the movie, so... But honestly, in my opinion, the core problem of this movie is also what makes it so much fun and so enjoyable for me. And that is that this movie is basically just Jurassic Park fan service the movie. And that's why a lot of people are really disappointed by it and don't like it. However, that's one of the reasons why I like it so much. Like I said, the legacy characters are in the majority of the movie. However, some of the writing and some of the dialogue in this film is not very good. In fact, it can get so cheesy and corny at times that even the legacy characters begin to feel like caricatures of themselves. Rather than trying to tell a more thought-provoking story, they basically just decided to make a movie that was pure escapist fun with, you know, the original characters and the new characters interacting in some funny scenes. and some really over-the-top and cheesy, but also really fun dinosaur action. And I think really that is the core reason why so many people don't like this movie, is that it just went for escapist fun and fan service rather than trying to tell a more mature story. We could have had a much darker and more mature Jurassic film about the dinosaurs taking over the world. Heck, they could have adapted the DX disease from the Michael Crichton novels and did something that was really similar to Planet of the Apes. But here's the thing. I don't think this movie is just pure dumb fun. I think there are some genuine things of merit in the story. So let's talk about that locust plotline, the main thing that a lot of people criticize about this film. Yes, it is disappointing that the dinosaurs aren't the main threat this time around, especially when you consider that Fallen Kingdom ended showing the dinosaurs beginning to enter the modern world. But honestly, I don't think the locusts are necessarily a bad idea. I think it's kind of an interesting new way of exploring the dangers of genetic power, which is, what Jurassic Park has always been about, the dangers of this kind of technology and, the crazy, potentially world-ending implications it could have when used poorly. And I think the locusts are a perfect and kind of new, interesting example of that. It kind of expands the world of Jurassic Park and shows that, dinosaurs aren't the only genetically modified animals that could potentially be a world-ending threat. I mean, I think it makes perfect logical sense that genetically modified locusts could potentially be a world-ending threat. And also, the company behind this whole locust plague, I think, is really cool in a lot of other ways. So Biosyn, they're sort of like the main threat in this movie, basically. They're this evil corporation, they're behind the whole locust plague, and a lot of people who aren't diehard fans of the Jurassic Park franchise might think, oh, this is just like a generic evil corporation. We've seen this in like a million other movies, but no, if you're a diehard fan of the Jurassic Park franchise, you would know that like Biosyn are something from the original Michael Crichton novels. They're the company that Lewis Dodgson works for in the original Michael Crichton novels. And if you don't know who Lewis Dodgson is, he's the guy who bribed Nedry to go and sabotage Jurassic Park in the original movie. So Biosyn, they've been trying to make their own dinosaurs and steal all of InGen's ideas since the original Jurassic Park. And I think it's really cool that the movies finally adapted that. And so yeah, I think it's really cool that they adapted Biosyn into the movies. They even made Lewis Dodgson sort of the main CEO and kind of the main villain of the movie. I mean, the way his character was written, though, I will admit, was really weird. He was not a very menacing bad guy at all. They kind of made him this really weird guy, kind of like almost a parody of like Tim Cook or Steve Jobs or something, which on one hand is kind of funny, but like also like it makes for kind of a really terrible villain. But I mean, this whole franchise has kind of had really unlikable villains from the start. Jurassic Park, human villains in the Jurassic Park franchise have never really been like really compelling bad guys. They're not really supposed to be compelling bad guys. They're just supposed to be these really greedy, unlikable people that you just can't wait to see get eaten, and Dodgson is no different. And I think the way he gets eaten in this movie is really satisfying. Seeing him get killed by the Dilophosaurs in pretty much the exact same way Dennis Nedry died in the first movie is a perfect way of bringing it full circle, and it was really satisfying to see. But yeah, no, Dodgson and Biosyn are ideas that have been in the Jurassic Park franchise since the beginning. And I think it's a really cool way of tying back to the first movie and, kind of bringing it full circle and having Biosyn be the company that, ultimately is like the last kind of world-ending threat in Jurassic World Dominion. We saw that they've been trying to steal, InGen's ideas from the very beginning, and now that dinosaurs have been released onto the world and dinosaur DNA is now available to everyone, it makes perfect sense that now they would come out of the shadows and try and become, like, the biggest dinosaur company on Earth. And that's exactly what we see in Jurassic World Dominion, the collecting rights to dinosaurs is given to Biosyn, and they kind of become the dinosaur company. So yeah, I like that Biosyn is sort of the main threat of the movie. I think it's a really cool way of tying it back to the first movie and bringing everything full circle. It is true that this movie as a whole definitely could have been better in terms of an ending for the Jurassic Park franchise, but I think just the decision to have Biosyn in the movie automatically makes it at least kind of a somewhat satisfying ending because, they are bringing it full circle, they are tying it back to the first movie, and I just think that's cool. Okay, but let's talk about those legacy characters again. Oh yes, I do think there are some problems with the way the legacy characters are written. Like I said, this movie basically is just Jurassic Park fan service the movie. They could have definitely had some better storylines to have the legacy characters take part in. Pretty much, like, a lot of it was just very fan servicey. Things like the joke of Ian and Malcolm almost taking off a shirt, or Dr. Grant and Ellie Sattler finally getting back together at the end. pretty much all of this is just, fan service. People didn't like that Ellie and Dr. Grant split up in Jurassic Park 3, so basically they fix it in this movie and have them fall in love and get together again. And, Ian Malcolm was a really funny character in the first movie, so they make him a full-on comic relief in this, which isn't necessarily bad. He does have some, more mature moments, he does kind of feel like the Lost World Ian Malcolm at times, like the scene where he's, scolding Dodgson for, being just a terrible person. But the actual ending, the final little montage where they're showing, dinosaurs interacting with, modern animals, and, there's the whole voiceover from Charlotte Lockwood saying that, we have to coexist with nature and each other if we want to survive. A lot of people don't like that, and I can understand why. I mean, again, the movie really didn't show how human beings were going to coexist with dinosaurs. It just kind of ends randomly by showing a bunch of dinosaurs getting along with modern animals, and then the credits roll. And in some ways, I do understand why that's, kind of a confusing note to end on. But pretty much the whole message of Jurassic Park, right, is that, mankind's hubris and, genetic power, meddling with things that, maybe we shouldn't, playing God, yada, yada, yada. These are all very dangerous things. Mankind, they're creating their own extinction. That's a theme that's really emphasized in this movie, especially with Dodgson and Biosyn and, them creating the locusts. It's human beings that are creating their own extinction. And so I think that, by ending on a note saying that, no, now we have to learn to coexist with the dinosaurs, I think that's a perfect note to end on. And the reason why, they have all the shots showing, the dinosaurs, peacefully interacting with the modern ecosystem shows that there is hope. It is possible to learn to coexist with the dinosaurs. Yes, it is a little disappointing that the movie didn't show exactly how we were going to learn to coexist with the dinosaurs. That definitely would have been better, but still, it's not the worst note to end on. I like that, the last shot of the movie, you have the Sinoceratops and the elephants, kind of migrating together on the African plains. It's a really cool shot to end on, and, showing all the different dinosaurs interacting with the modern world. But going back to the whole point of the dinosaurs on the mainland plot line not even being utilized at all, I mean, I just don't think that's true. Yes, the movie could have focused on it a lot more, but the dinosaurs are still a looming threat throughout the story. Yes, the locusts are the main globe-ending threat, but okay, so this is actually something a lot of people don't know. So I actually bought the Jurassic World Dominion Junior novelization because, I was a kid back when Jurassic World 2015 came out, and I wasn't allowed to see it in the theater. So my parents, they bought me the Junior novelization so I could, know the story of the movie. And I've subsequently bought the ones for Fallen Kingdom and Dominion. And there's a line in the Junior novelization, and they actually filmed this too. There's a line from Ian Malcolm that they cut from the movie for some reason, and it really would have made people hate the Locust plotline, I feel like, a lot less, because there's basically this line where he's talking to Ellie, and he's like, we're going to get wiped out by the locusts, and the dinosaurs are going to be left as the dominant species. So the dinosaurs are going to take over. Yes, it's the locusts that are the thing that's going to cause the dinosaurs to take over, so that's still a little disappointing, I'm sure, for a lot of you. But the dinosaurs they're still a looming threat. They are the ones who are going to take charge when we go extinct in this movie. And again, kind of like the whole core message of Jurassic Park, or at least a part of the core message of Jurassic Park, is that, we are the ones causing all of this chaos. We are the ones playing God. We're the ones meddling with things we shouldn't. And the locusts are a perfect example of that. Ian Malcolm literally has that line at the end of Fallen Kingdom where he says, we are causing our own extinction. And he has that line where he says to Dodgson in this movie where he's like, you are racing us toward the extinction of our species and you don't care. And again, that whole scene where they're sort of having that little argument, that great writing. And, again, there's another line in Fallen Kingdom that kind of emphasizes this point, that mankind are causing their own extinction. Ian Malcolm in Fallen Kingdom says, these creatures were here before us, but if we're not careful, they're going to be here after. And that's exactly the threat we see in Dominion. Because still, even with the dinosaurs literally beginning to take over the world, mankind is still deciding to meddle with things they shouldn't. Ergo, the locusts. And also on top of all that, the first 20 minutes of the movie has dinosaurs interacting with the modern world. We get a bunch of scenes of them, in cool new environments that we didn't get to see before, like the Apatosaurus in the lumberyard and Owen wrangling the Parasaurolophus. And not to mention the entire Malta action scene. These are all scenes that utilize the dinosaurs on the mainland. The movie, I think a lot of people forget just how much of the dinosaurs on the mainland we do get to see in this movie. But continuing on with the subject of the dinosaurs, let's talk about the main dinosaur antagonist of this movie, aka the Giganotosaurus, or Giganotosaurus. I've always pronounced it Giganotosaurus. How do you guys pronounce it? Let me know in the comments down below. But yeah, the Giganotosaurus. So the dinosaurs in this movie definitely have their fair share of problems. I've already said in another video, I think the dinosaurs in this movie definitely feel more like obstacles and props for action scenes rather than genuinely dangerous animals. But let's talk about the main dinosaur, the Giganotosaurus. This was the dinosaur that they were hyping up in all the trailers and stuff. It was supposed to be like the next Indominus Rex or Indoraptor. But this time it wasn't going to be a hybrid. It was going to be a real species of dinosaur that actually existed. You know, the Giganotosaurus, it really is kind of like a natural, non-hybrid version of the Indominus Rex in many ways. And the Giganotosaurus is definitely something that a lot of people were disappointed with in this movie. A lot of people say it's by far the worst dinosaur villain in the whole franchise. And I'm definitely not going to knock you for thinking that. But I don't think the Giganotosaurus is a bad dinosaur villain. I think, yes, it probably is one of the weaker, heck, maybe even the weakest of the dinosaur villains we've gotten. But especially if you watch the extended cut of Jurassic World Dominion, the Giganotosaurus, I think, especially in the extended cut, is a really underrated dinosaur villain. So I will agree that in the theatrical cut, the Giganotosaurus kind of feels like just another generic big bad dinosaur that the T-Rex fights and eventually wins against and kills it at the end. And it didn't need to die because it really didn't act all that much like a villain. It was just acting like a normal dinosaur. I will agree with all those points for the theatrical cut. However, if you watch the extended cut, they put the prologue back into the movie. And if you don't know, like, the prologue was originally supposed to be in the movie. It was supposed to be the opening scene. But when they were, cutting things out of the movie, they decided to cut out the prologue for the theatrical cut. But when they released the extended cut, they put the prologue back in the movie. And that was a really good decision, at least in my opinion. Because the whole sort of reasoning of why the Giganotosaurus is supposed to, feel like a villain comes from the prologue. Because, of course, if you've seen the prologue, there's the whole flashback scene to 65 million years ago, prehistoric times. And we see a Giganotosaurus and a T-Rex fight each other, and the Giganotosaurus wins, kills the T-Rex, and we see the mosquito land on the dead T-Rex, and that sort of explains Rexy's backstory, how her DNA sort of came to be preserved. So the T-Rex and the Giganotosaurus, they're kind of like ancient rivals, right? They had this fight all those years ago, back during prehistoric times. And so now in modern day, us, the audience, we're all hoping to see Rexy win, right? And that's what happens. So in the extended cut, I think the whole rivalry between the T-Rex and the Giganotosaurus works a lot better. I plan on doing a whole video about this, but just basically, in the extended cut, the Giganotosaurus definitely works a lot better as a villain because, we see her kill Rexy in prehistoric times, and we want to see Rexy win in modern day. So, yeah, the Giganotosaurus definitely works a lot better as an antagonist in the extended cut. Because, in the theatrical cut, they don't have the prologue, so the Giganotosaurus is just like another big scary looking dinosaur that Rexy has to fight. It just doesn't really feel all that important. Like, it's just, we get to see dinosaurs fight each other again, which is cool, but it doesn't really have any bigger impact beyond that. And the whole reason why I think, especially in the extended cut, the Giganotosaurus definitely works a lot better is also because we've never really had a dinosaur rivalry in the Jurassic Park franchise that actually gets developed over the course of the movie because, in previous Jurassic Park movies, it typically just went where, the T-Rex fought the big bad dinosaur at the end, and then that was it. Or in Jurassic Park 3, the Spinosaurus and the T-Rex don't really have a rivalry. They just have that one fight scene, the Spinosaurus wins, and then that's it. In Jurassic World, Rexy and the Indominus Rex, they fight each other at the end of the movie. But again, they don't really have a full-on rivalry that lasts throughout the entire movie. But no, if you watch the extended cut of Dominion, the Giganotosaurus and Rexy kind of have this whole rivalry that's sort of built up throughout the movie. You have the prologue, and then there's the little scene where they fight each other in the forest over the deer carcass, and then finally the big final battle. And I love the part where you think Rexy's dead and there's the lightning flash, and for a brief second it flashes back to prehistoric times. Love that. Okay, so yeah, the whole T-Rex Giganotosaurus rivalry definitely works a lot better in the extended cut, at least in my opinion. But let's talk about the design of the Giganotosaurus, because that's another thing that a lot of people really are not a fan of. All right, here you go. Ready? This is probably my biggest hot take so far. I love the Giganotosaurus' design in Dominion. Yes, I know, it's not scientifically accurate in the slightest, but come on. The Dilophosaurus is living proof that you don't need to make a dinosaur design scientifically accurate for it to be cool. Seriously, the Dilophosaurus is seriously iconic, but its design is not scientifically accurate in the slightest. So yeah, I like the Giganotosaurus design. Yes, it definitely has a very, like, exaggerated movie monster type look. It basically looks like a miniature Godzilla, but I like a lot of the, the smaller features that a lot of people wouldn't notice, like the fact that, like, it's got, like, its sort of skin color and skin texture looks almost exactly like the skin of a crocodile. I think that sort of grounds it in a certain level of reality. It still makes it feel like a real animal while still giving it that kind of intimidating movie monster-esque look. It still feels like a real animal while still also having a very monstrous look, if that makes sense. And I think, the big hump on its back, yeah, look, it looks a bit weird. It looks a bit wonky. But I don't know, I think it looks cool. I think it gives it a very unique sort of look. Like, whether you love it or hate it, I think the Giganotosaurus' design from Dominion is at least memorable. So yeah, I know. I'm sure a lot of you are going to disagree with me on this one, but I don't know. I really like the Giganotosaurus from Dominion. And, yeah, that's just my personal hot take. Do I think it's like the best dinosaur antagonist of the whole franchise? No. Obviously, Indominus Rex is way better. Heck, I'll even say Spinosaurus is way better. And heck, the Indoraptor, I would even say, is scarier at a lot of points. But in terms of like, sort of like an arch nemesis for Rexy, I think the Giganotosaurus is kind of a cool villain. But overall, I still completely get it, if you don't like Jurassic World Dominion. I'm just explaining to you why I think the movie is underrated, or at the very least, not as bad as people say. I'm actually really excited to see what a lot of you guys comment on this video. I'm sure I'm going to get a lot of them saying how wrong I am, and that's, it's your complete right to do so. But I've been seeing Jurassic Park 3, which was a movie that for a while a lot of people hated. I've been seeing that movie get a lot of love recently. And I thought, hey, you know what? Maybe I'll be the first person to say that I don't hate Jurassic World Dominion. And I was one of the first people to defend it if it ever, starts to get love in the future. So, yeah, feel free to, comment down below your opinions on the film and your opinions on some of the, counterpoints I've made to a lot of the criticisms of this movie. And, yeah, I hope you all enjoyed this video. Please subscribe and leave a like. And for now, I'll see you guys in the next video. Goodbye.